Wherever Cassian goes, rebellion follows. We finally got to see Cassian escape from the prison in an action-packed episode, and boy did it deliver. Everything about the prison break was executed brilliantly, from the lead-up to the final scene. The episode begins with Cassian and Kino preparing to return to their cells after Olaf's death, and Cassian gives Kino a short explanation of why now is the time to fight back. It felt like Kino had taken a small step back after where the last episode ended, but once Cassian had the line about dying fighting back rather than submitting, Kino finally comes back around and starts to debate it in his mind again. Both Diego Luna and Andy Serkis have had great performances in the episode, whether it be their facial expressions or the emotion they brought to their dialogue. As a viewer, we can see that fighting spirit in Cassian that we've seen before, both earlier in the series but also in Rogue One, and Kino is just a regular citizen who wants to be free again. While Cassian then explains to the other prisoners what really happened on 2, Kino makes his decision and prepares for escape. We get a quick scene on Ferrix where a doctor is visiting who I initially assumed it to be Marva, but looking back it could be anyone. The camera briefly focuses on Cinta, and then moves to a man nearby watching everything play out. I don't believe we've seen him before, so I don't know what to think of the scene, but I'm sure it'll have a greater meaning down the line. We go back to the prison, and everything from this moment on had me at the edge of my seat, heart racing, and eyes glued to the screen. Of course, Cassian and Melshi make it out alive, but between the music, pacing, and editing, the episode was very successful in establishing stakes ahead of time and making me care for some of these random workers who I didn't really care about beforehand. It was less about the specific person and more about the loss of life while attempting to escape and return home. We're shown how drastically different some of the prisoners are, with some of them being extremely confident and others extremely nervous, and then Cassian makes his way to the bathroom again to burst the pipe which disables the floor. Even though it was fairly obvious that it was going to work, I was still worried in the moment that he wasn't going to break it in time, and that something was going to go wrong immediately. The prisoners begin to stock up on weapons as the Imperials prepare to bring the prisoner down, and I thought that it was funny that none of the guards seemed to care that Cassian was soaking wet. But it didn't affect my viewing at all, and it just shows how careless they are. The attack begins, and every time a prisoner died it felt like an important character had died, just because it was showing the consequences of rebellion. The attack was also reminiscent of Andor, with the Ewoks, where the Empire underestimates an opponent with significantly worse weaponry, but numbers and coordination on their side. While I enjoyed the Aldhani action, this felt much more like a rebellion to me, and it did a much better job of setting the stakes and then continuing to show the death that resulted. Kino rallies the prisoners, and as the rebellion continues to spread throughout the compound, one of my favorite scenes from the breakout was all of the Imperials quietly hiding behind a locked door. Some of them may believe in the Empire and its cause, but most of them only care about themselves and their own lives, so they'll gladly let a group of prisoners escape if it means saving their own skin. They eventually make it to open air, and of course it has to end with heartbreak. As the prisoners jump into the water, Kino reveals that he can't swim. His story was definitely left open-ended, so it's possible we see him again, but I'm not counting on it. His look at the end could have been taken as disheartening, but I initially saw it as a man that reassured himself that death out there would be better than being captured and tortured by the Empire. So even though we don't see what happens, I think one of the possibilities is that he took his chances and jumped. Since he was such an integral character to the arc, kind of like Cinta was earlier in the season, I feel like we'll get confirmation regarding his fate eventually. It's just a matter of when. This part of the episode ends with Cassian and Melshi running across land away from Imperial ships, and even though it was small, I really liked the transition from Luthen saying he needs all the heroes he can get, to then 2 people who we know eventually become a part of the larger rebellion. Speaking of Luthen, that may have been the most surprising aspect of the episode. I had seen speculation online that he was a spy, and I was mostly convinced that it was true when the camera lingered on him during the ISB scene, but I didn't expect it in this episode. In all honesty, when Luthen mentioned a person wanting to meet, I was really hoping that we were going to finally see Bail Organa, but sadly it was not meant to be. I'm still holding out hope that we see him in the season, even if it's just a small scene. At first, the dynamic between Luthen and Lonnie made me think that Luthen had some blackmail over him, especially when his daughter was the first speaking point. But he later mentions how they both took a vow, just like what Val mentioned last episode. I really hope we see Cassian take whatever vow this is, just so we can get an idea of what it is, because these people seem to be extremely committed to it, almost to a fault. Lonnie offers information about Dedra Meero to Luthen, as well as the knowledge that the ISB knows about the mission to Spellhouse. Luthen makes the decision to let things be, and while this comes as a shock to both Luthen and initially to me as well, the move makes complete sense strategically, and it shows what Luthen values most when it comes to the rebellion. He's willing to let 50 men die if it means he keeps his spy on the inside. While this didn't cause me to like Lonnie as much as I was hoping, it did add a lot to Luthen's character, especially after he's had minimal presence in the past couple of episodes. It's hard to say where things go from here, but I feel like a logical next step is for Cassian and Luthen to somehow reconnect again, but nothing jumps out as being predictable, which is something the series has done a good job with. And lastly, moving on to Mon Mothma's one scene, this was probably my least favorite episode of hers so far, but it was still quite enjoyable. I instantly bought the character of Davos Skulden and his reputation, and much of it was through Mon Mothma's attempt to create boundaries and be quick while still being gracious and personable. However, she is obviously disgusted at the thought of having her daughter set up with Davos' son, and while we've seen her complicated family dynamic so far, we're shown that Mon does try to be protective of her daughter, even if it could be taken as more selfish reasons than anything else, with Davo being a thug and all. With only 2 episodes left, I'm interested to see how the story is wrapped up. I think Cassian can go in multiple directions from here now that he's escaped, but they all make sense in my mind, whereas with Mon, I'm unsure of how they'll choose to wrap up her story and what exactly they'll be wrapping up in only 2 episodes. She barely had a presence in this episode, so I wouldn't be surprised if Mon and her story received more development next week, but I don't think it's necessary. One Way Out quickly establishes high stakes in an action-packed first half Prison Break, but the second half slows down and isn't packed with as much development, earning a rating of 9 out of 10. And let me know what you thought of the 10th episode in the comments below. Remember to like the video and subscribe for more reviews like this, and remember to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.